Should we start? Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation on prospects and challenges in the housing and infrastructure sector. The Budget 2024-25 announced this morning has brought forth many opportunities, some new and some that are a continuation of ongoing initiatives, all of which will facilitate the building of a Viksit and Atmanirbhar India. We are indeed glad to have with us eminent sector experts who will share their observations and analysis of the implications of these announcements. I now take this opportunity to introduce our distinguished panelists. We have our Chairman and Managing Director of HUDCO and the host for this event, Shri Sanjay Kulshrestha, who brings with him 3 decades of rich experience in the infrastructure sector, particularly in power generation, transmission and distribution. As CMD HUDCO, his vision is to significantly enhance the corporation's role in supplementing efforts of Government of India for creation of world-class infrastructure in line with Viksit Bharat 2047. Next, we have Dr. Lavish Bhandari, who is the President of the Center for Social and Economic Progress. He has published widely on subjects related to sustainable livelihoods, industrial, economic and social reforms in India, economic geography and financial inclusion. Apart from applied economics research, Dr. Bhandari has built, seeded and exited from 3 companies in the research, analytics and digital domains, including Indicus Analytics, a leading economic research firm. Currently, he is conducting research on issues of inclusion, India's energy transition and how it will impact the government as well as the economy. Next, we have Professor P.S.N. Rao from School of Planning and Architecture, who is a well-recognized personality in the fields of architecture, town planning and urban development, playing a proactive role as an academician, consultant, policy advocate and advisor for over 3 decades. His professional work focuses on a range of areas in urban planning, which includes affordable housing and real estate, smart cities, urban land management, property valuation and urban governance. Then we have Dr. K.K. Pandey, Professor from Urban Management and Coordinator, Center for Urban Studies at Indian Institute for Public Administration. Dr. Pandey has intensively worked on urban management and finance during the last 4 decades and coordinated empirical research, training and advisory services on matters related to urban governance, infrastructure and housing. We are still waiting for Dr. Jayashankar to join us, as also Mr. Vikas Chandra, who's indicated from Deloitte, who's indicated that he's on his way. We then have Dr. Partha Mukherjee from the Center for Policy Research. He was previously part of the founding team of the Infrastructure Development Finance Company, focusing on private participation in infrastructure. More recently, he was chair of the Working Group on Migration, Government of India, and member of the High-Level Railway Restructuring Committee, Ministry of Railways, and the Technical Advisory Committee of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation. Each speaker will be requested to share their thoughts in about 5 minutes. At the end of all their interventions by the experts, we will open the floor for questions. Without further ado, may I request Shri Sanjay Kulshrestha to please welcome our guests and share his thoughts.
A warm welcome to Dr. Partho, Dr. Lavish Bhandari, Dr. P.S.N. Roy, and Dr. K.K. Pandey. Thank you for joining us and enlightening us on the budget which was presented today. I think to start with, the government has came very clearly on the infrastructure to be created for Viksit Bharat, and under budget government has defined 9 priority sectors. And out of 9, I think there are 3 sectors which are directly concerned and connected with the HUDCO. Since HUDCO is a premium agency which is extending lending towards the infrastructure, but also the consultancy and the capacity building. So the three sectors which I can earmark where the HUDCO role and responsibility will be there are urban development, energy security, and the infrastructure. Under urban development, I think the budget has very clearly beyond this 1.11 lakh crores, which is directly for the capex. But other than that, the principles of the development regarding the road, port, airport, or town planning, or means water, or whatever is connected for the urban development, everything has been very clearly spelled out in the brief speech of Honorable Finance Minister. But I think it will be detailed in the Gazette notification. So the intent and intention of the government is very, very clear that the ecosystem for holistic development of the infrastructure in the country and in line with the aspirations of 140 billion peoples living in this country should be there. And I think companies like HUDCO, PSUs like HUDCO or IFCL or REC or PFC or banks and NAFID, all these things, premium institution which will be responsible primarily to extend the fund for development, because finally the projects are created on some financial models, workable financial models, and lenders will have a responsibility of extending the best terms to the infrastructure and maintaining their ALM and the compliance structures as well. So second is the, I think, energy transition, which is much talked about topic, and globally, I think there is a lot of discussions and lot of participatory discussions which is being taken over, and Honorable Prime Minister has a very big plan by 2030 that what should be our renewable energy capacity and how we will be transiting from the conventional energy to the non-conventional energy. Now we are already transited from the power to term energy, and now I think the next phase is the chemical energy that we will be doing, including hydrogen or ammonia kind of things. So, and first and the foremost, which will be directly linked with the HUDCO operation, is the housing. You may have seen the reference of the housing during the budget speech. Sometime it is PMAY, 3 crores maybe. Rural or urban, then the rental housing was also talked about. Then the interest subvention was also talked about. So I think there are so many things which are linked or interrelated with the operations of the HUDCO that I think we have to work forward to create that system within the company, and I think this is the best time, and this is as far as the infrastructure development, I think this is the best budget, and it will lead to the results of the Viksit Bharat. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. We've also been joined by Mr. Vikas Chandra, Director, Deloitte, who's a senior urban infrastructure expert with special interest in PPP projects, municipal finance, and city economics. He's currently the national team leader of the Smart Cities mission at the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs. For the opening remarks, may I invite Dr. Lavish Bhandari, President, CSEP, to please share his thoughts.
Thank you. It's indeed a great honor to be here and talk about a subject which is very close to heart. So it's not even been a few hours since the finance minister announced a budget, and many of us have yet to go through the details. It's very easy to go into the what's good, what's bad part of budget, and I'm not really going to do that. But I'm just going to just talk about the various challenges that the finance minister and her team must have faced, and the kind of prioritization and what that tells us what the government is thinking about. And it also tells us about the gaps that there are in the public discourse, which in my interactions with the government, I feel that the government is really looking for inputs from a whole range of people, and including from HUDCO. So I will try and just take that. And of course, I've been given 5 minutes, so promise you I won't take more than that. So first of all, I think the intention of the government is very clear, that you need to keep a tight fisc. Now that is by far, in budgetary exercises, by far the main objective is that. It's very easy to break the whatever targets you have set for yourself, especially when conditions are so difficult. You have many challenges on multiple fronts, and it's very easy, it could have been, for the government to say, okay, fine, we haven't reached 5.1, we're going to make it to 5.2 or 5.3% deficit. But targeting at 4.9 is something which is creditable, and it just tells you, I think more than credit, it just tells you the direction. That is, that the government intends to be expenditure-wise conservative. Now, that of course does not mean that it will skimp on welfare, which is fairly evident. And one of the major elements of that has been the for PMAYU of the 1 crore housing. I feel, in a sense, it's easier to allocate funds than to see their efficient fructification. Because there are so many different pressures weighing on them. I think on one side, of course, you need housing for the poor, and that's what's driving this. On the other hand, you also realize that there is a problem related to climate change, specifically the heating of cities. And it would be nice to also, it could have been nice to build in green building plans within the budget, but the government has elsewhere talked about it. And it's very difficult to, of course, tie in many different things into the same program. But the fact is, that doesn't mean, the fact that the budget didn't talk about it doesn't mean that it isn't there. So while we are talking about the 1 crore houses in urban areas, we are also at the back also thinking of that there is a climate change process, and which is obviously linked to not just green buildings, it's linked to urban planning, it's linked to the hot zones, urban greenification, and so on. So there are all of those issues that the budget doesn't talk about, but other government documents do. And it's something, it's agencies such as HUDCO, ourselves, think tanks like ourselves, who need to at least, keep up this conversation going on this. And so that's one element which I think really is an important one. I think a really difficult part of this government's, for the last few years, has been trying to ensure a high tax to GDP ratio. And I think the government has done everything under the sun. It's not just this government, past governments have tried too, but more so this government and this finance minister have tried everything under the sun to get that tax to GDP ratio above the 16 to 18% that it seems to keep on going back and forth under. If you can't do that, what do you do? I mean, it is going to be very difficult to spend on the two key aspects, health and education. Those expenditures have been more or less stagnant, I mean, with some amount of movements. But if you don't get tax to GDP ratios high enough, you'll never be able to get these expenditures up. If you can't get these expenditures up, it'll be very difficult to achieve the Viksit Bharat status. I mean, we all know it. You don't need to study economics to know that. And I think the finance minister, in some of the conversations, is fairly conversant of that problem. Except that this is a challenge that the government will need to address going forward, and it's kind of open information that things need to be done there. One of the things that needs to be done there is, of course, related to infrastructure. That's another area which impacts you. But I think that's work in progress. I'd like to talk a little bit, spend 2 minutes more, and then I'll of a subject which is closest to my heart, and that's the environment. I feel that the reason why most budget documents in the last few years, most government documents talk about the environment, but are unable to really have very specific allocations, is because many things related to adaptation, the government is not being fed enough from think tanks like ourselves, and perhaps even industry. On mitigation, there's a lot of action. We know that. And that's because there's a very clear messaging that is coming in, move towards renewable energy, move towards EVs, et cetera, But on adaptation, the messages are not very clear. And I would request HUDCO to actually internally have these conversations, and think tanks must as well. Because really, we need to focus a lot towards adaptation. You can mitigate as much as you want, but over the next 20 years, the environment will be different, the poor will suffer the most, and we need to adapt. And I think that, again, here as well, the government is aware of it. It's not that it's not, except that where are the ideas coming from? I'll stop there. I think we'll take it up later. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you very much for keeping to time. May I now invite Sri Vikas Chandra, Director Deloitte, to please share his thoughts. I'd request you to come here.
Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to be as telegraphic as possible. 4 points, in my opinion, which are there in the budget today. The first thing is obviously about creating 14 economic growth center. It is great that they are talking about economics more and more at city level. So I believe that is a great opportunity. City economics, when it is actually discussed, that is where action happens on ground. So I believe that is a great kind of insight for this budget. They have used a very interesting word, creative, and that allows you to think. So that is, in my opinion, a great opportunity. Second thing, I'll also talk about when they talk about bankable projects, especially in urban infrastructure. It is great that we are talking about bankability when we talk about urban infrastructure projects. I think that is an important desire of the budget. So I believe there's a great role to play for all of us in the room. Surely the place we are, HUDCO, they need to, entire bankability. I think we have done some effort in past, but surely not enough. So there has been a call for action there. So that's the second point I feel. The third part, which I feel is the increase on chorus of having private sector investments, and especially from capital markets and other places. I understand no matter how much money the central government has, no matter how much we expect from the state, the cities need money and they need in plenty. We are probably giving them maybe 1/10 of what they actually need. So that is where the whole idea of TOD, the whole idea of adding kind of money from different sources, from private sector, giving VGF and PPP a priority. So that, in my opinion, is a kind of an insight and some directions for us. So that is the third point. Fourth point, which I really kind of felt very interesting, was creating 100 streets, or food streets you call it. Love food, I'm sure many of you love as well. So that's not a food street, that's a public space. And the whole, normally urban development is not very much focused on creating or developing the public spaces. So public spaces, when they kind of, I think they have caught it very minutely and perfectly, in my opinion. If we create good public spaces, I'm sure our cities will be a better place. So these are 4 points, in my opinion, which are good insight to the budget, and they have some direction for us to show. Thank you.
Thank you, Vikasji, for your crisp 4 points. I now request Dr. Partha Mukhopadhyay to please share his thoughts.
Thank you, and thank you to HUDCO for organizing this and inviting us. As Lavish said earlier, it's been only about less than 4 hours since the finance minister stopped speaking. But the 3 areas that the chairman, managing director sort of outlined, priorities 5, 6, and 7, which is urban development, energy security, and infrastructure, are indeed central to the budget's expenditure plans. Let me begin with infrastructure in a sense. And as you can see, the finance minister has also made an extremely interesting allocation. She has allocated 11,111 crores for capital expenditure on capital account. And in addition to this, there is separate 1.5 lakh crores that goes to the states. And this is a loan, but it is a loan of 50 years at zero interest. So essentially, it's a grant. But in the grant itself, they're hoping to use this grant to get the states to work on one of the issues which is definitely central to both cities and to infrastructure, which is land. So digitization of land records, which is important in rural areas for infrastructure planning and for urban areas, definitely for urban planning going forward, is something that is linked to access of the states to this particular 1.5 lakh crores. So that's one broad area that I think is that they're working through. A large chunk of this 11 lakh, about almost half, I would say, a little less than half, is actually for roads and railways. Roads, of course, you have seen substantial visibility. Railways, as of yet, while there has been substantial investment, and you've over the last few years, you are yet to see the kind of transformation and the role that railways can play in becoming the freight provider of choice. And therefore, that is one area in which one will have to see as to how things go forward. This idea of, as Vikas mentioned, of creating these 14 cities with the, and they're also sort of transit hubs, but not as, and they're also going to be, from what the has been laid out, and additional groups of cities who would be part of the industrial corridors. There's been emphasis on the industrial corridor in Andhra Pradesh. There is emphasis on 12 industrial parks under the National Industrial Corridor Development Program. And it's there that I see the possibility of being able to synergize both road and rail infrastructure going forward. And that is important from the green future point of view. You'll notice the economic survey, the chief economic advisor published an op-ed piece today referring to the survey and focused almost entirely on the environmental section of the economic survey, which is the final chapter of the survey. And therefore, moving freight traffic from road to rail would be a central piece of sort of reducing the carbon intensity of our development trajectory going forward. And that is one of the issues that in the infra space that would be there. So even within the 14 cities that were that Vikas mentioned, which are the 14 large cities with population above 3 million, there are transit-oriented plans. So the issue of public transport and how we are working with that space, given that about 1/4 of the budget of the, actually 1/3 of the budget of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3, is essentially on metro rails, which I don't think is a very useful. Delhi, of course, has benefited substantially. Bangalore, Kolkata, maybe Mumbai, and others might as well. But many other smaller cities might need much more emphasis on road-based transports. And the PM e-bus Seva, therefore, now has a substantial increase in allocation from 20 crores to about 1,400 crores or something going forward. So working in the public transport space, I think, would be the second large area that is looking forward. The third area that we're looking at is housing, which is central, of course, to HUDCO's mission. HUDCO, incidentally, if you look in the structures, HUDCO is the government safety net. Because in some sense, if you look at the budgetary provisions, you see almost quadrupling of the sort of budget line under HUDCO, which is the safety net in case the government needs more resources for borrowing. But as a result, and it looms large in the government's imagination. In this particular structure, they're looking, the PMAY urban, the allocation is roughly similar to what it was the last year, and so you're expecting similar kinds of growth places to take place. But there's also interesting models that would need to be developed, and this is something that going forward one needs to think through. So apart from models for transport, we would need to think about models for rental housing, and this rental housing models would need to be for a general population. They talk about facilitating rentals more generally, talking about rentals for workers and rentals for women. That's a space in which there have been some small experiments, but not really something at scale that has happened going forward. And this is an area which might need some work in that space. In addition to that, you have the other issue, which is a central issue for most of our cities, which is water. And in water, you will notice from the reference in the economic survey, the reference in the environmental stuff of recycling and reuse of water. And here in the budget, they are planning in partnership with state governments and multilateral banks to essentially develop bankable projects for water supply, sewage treatment, and solid waste management for about 100 large cities, which is the structure that we are sort of looking forward to going forward. In terms of resource management, as you can see the focus structures, there is a substantial story in that space. Finally, the issue that one wants to point out is that another sort of very core theme of the budget, in fact, the central theme of the budget, given the amount of both pages and annexure space that has been devoted to it, is employment. Employment is useful, doesn't necessarily, as not just an issue of the government recognizes that growth so far has not generated, while growth has been relatively robust and stable, it has not generated the kind of employment that one would have expected to happen. And the government is therefore making a direct push towards, if one wants to use language that is similar to the other language, production-linked incentives, and now you have employment-linked incentives to a large extent across the scale. If that happens, to my mind, as the workforce formalizes and structures, you'll also begin to see both more stability and a broader generation of housing demand and structures going forward. That is something, again, that I see as sort of, if they manage to make this happen, they're targeting over 40 million, if I remember correctly, in terms of total employment assessment going forward over the course of this year under the various schemes that they have outlined. And if that actually comes to fruition, then you would hopefully get to see a substantial boost to the overall economic system, which is perhaps about the only way where you'd get a sort of reduction in your overall deficits going forward. So that's where the initial remarks I think would be, I would conclude, and looking forward to the engagement of and the final engagement you'd have was a substantial amount of resources, both in sort of solar housing and structures, in energy security. You have pumped storage, you have solar housing, and also in other areas in the energy transition of small MSME clusters. Again, an area where I see a large role for HUDCO in terms of support to traditional and micro industries in shifting their energy into a more green area. So not only a large investment in across the housing infrastructure energy space, but also a shift towards a much more climate-friendly and resilient kind of structures. What is being attempted, whether it will come to fruition or not, is something that only the future will tell us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I now invite Dr. Professor P.S.N. Rao to please come and share his thoughts.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for having me here this afternoon. We were very intently listening to the speech of the Honorable Finance Minister this morning. And I think she started off by talking about the poor, women, youth, and the farmers. As Professor Partha spoke towards the end, he talked about employment. So I think it is extremely important that when we're talking about looking at the economy as a whole, if people have money in their pockets, then they will be able to spend, and then they will be in a position to consume the services. So that's how the 9 priorities, I think, have emerged in terms of productivity in agriculture and employment, jobs. I think there were several provisions on internship in companies and so on and so forth, with which the finance minister started off. Several employment related measures, but coming down to the urban sector more in particular, I think there were some very important messages that have been there. Of course, the budget is an exercise in allocation of funds, but how do we translate this allocation into actions on the ground is where I think HUDCO and other organizations would come into being. Cities as growth hubs and creative redevelopment of cities, because squarely today acquiring land or accumulating land, assembling land for any urban development purposes is an extremely difficult task. So I think a mention was made about town planning schemes at least 3 times in the budget. So I think the government is squarely looking at budget. I think is an exercise not just of financial allocation, but also giving a direction to policy in the urban space. So how do you put this town planning scheme methodology together to bring in whether it is industrial parks or whether it is the corridors, the 12 corridors that have been talked about, or what have you. I think the town planning scheme is a methodology that is being talked about. So how can HUDCO fund town planning schemes? HUDCO has been conventionally funding land acquisition projects on a large scale over the last several decades. But now perhaps a time has come wherein HUDCO should look at funding town planning schemes for these industrial parks and other developments. So this is one thing. There was a mention about market-based methodologies. So this is again, I think, very interesting to develop more entrepreneurship rather than merely providing grants under the PMAY urban. There is of course an additional 3 crore houses that the government of India is talking about. So how these 3 crores houses are going to emerge? Will it be the same old 4 verticals, or should we think about some other methodology is also something to be looked at. Stamp duty moderation, I think, is a very good suggestion that has come from the central government, but I don't know if there is any budget allocation for that, but I think that's more of a policy statement that has been made. But the transaction costs in real estate, I think, are very important for the market to grow, and therefore that becomes important. On rental housing, I think Maharashtra has been a pioneer in creating rental housing, but somehow that has not really succeeded. So I think now with the push in this budget on rental housing, we need to learn from the Maharashtra experience, and we need to structure new schemes which are more acceptable to the corporate sector, because if you look at rental yields as against the capital investments that you need to make in rental housing, how is it going to be profitable? Where is the break-even point? And there are several market-oriented companies like OYO and etc., who are providing a lot of rental housing for youngsters. So that is a space where we need to look at. There was also something about working hostels for women that has been talked about. So I think that's a very important area. Increasingly, we have single women going out and traveling to various cities and working, and so they need space. They can't really. So what kind of rental housing for working women. Traditionally, we've been having these working women hostels and so on, but then now we need to look at a different paradigm. And there again, there are funding opportunities wherein HUDCO can even look at funding private entrepreneurs, large corporates who would like to come and fund some of these. There's an important announcement on the peri-urban areas. I think if you look at all our cities, there's a lot of urban sprawl that's happening around cities. And how do we manage that when you look at cities as growth hubs and you're talking about industrial parks in cities and you want to generate more and more employment? So you will have a lot of migration coming into the cities. So where are these people going to live? So the peripheral areas are going to be subjected to a lot of pressure on urban development. So I would have actually loved to see some provisions on allocations for cities to make master plans and so on and so forth. So that was something which I could not find. You don't get everything that you want in the budget, but then there are, I think, allocations, no doubt. There are also policy directions. And how do we take those and how do we articulate around those, and how can an organization, a techno-financial organization like HUDCO, take it forward into bankable projects so that people can actually get funding to projectize these into projects which can be implemented and which can realize the vision. Lastly, there was also a mention about property records, because I think in India land and property records are in a big mess. In the agricultural sector, a lot of work has been done, but in the urban property record digitization, not much work has been done. So there has been a mention here, and in this allocation under the infrastructure head, this has come about. So probably that could also go a long way in updating the tax administration and the ULB finances, that has been told. And finally, the taxonomy of climate change was the language that was used by the finance minister. So climate finance is, I think, one area where there's a lot of fund available. So how do we access that in the current context of climate change and green buildings and all that kind of a thing? I think that is also an area which requires a lot of further unbundling, because many of us don't really understand how do we tap into those resources, how do the ULBs tap into those resources. There is a MOEF Gazette notification of 2023 which talks about this, but then many of us are not really aware of it, at least at the urban local body level. So I think that relationship between the Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Urban Affairs and Ministry of Finance, and of course techno funding agencies like HUDCO, I think there's a lot of brainstorming that needs to be done and unbundling to take this entire exercise forward. So thank you. These are my initial remarks, and if required we can further add on. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Lastly, I invite Dr. K.K. Pandey to please share his thoughts.
Thank you very much, HUDCO, for giving me a chance to share my views on this budget. As indicated by earlier speakers, the budget is guided by the national economic development policies. And these policies indicate positive results in recent months. The growth last year has been 8.2% GDP growth. 9.9% was the growth of construction and manufacturing, which are labor intensive. And income intensive sectors of financial services, real estate, and other services also show 8.4%. On the other hand, agriculture shows 1.4%, which means structural transformation, meaning the surplus labor from rural areas will come to urban for jobs. So job is the main issue, as Partho also indicated, and 79 lakh people would be coming to our cities each year in next 5 years. And from that angle, this budget tries to address that issue through proper there are other measures government has suggested in MSMEs and other areas, and urban area has to supplement those efforts through infrastructure and housing. And the budget is focusing basically on 100, whatever we have seen in the smart city. Those are the cities, whether we take for 14 cities for TOD or other infrastructure development, and they are focusing on brownfield development and peri-urban areas. But how to do that is a million-dollar question. Brownfield, the land value gains in bigger cities like Delhi are locked up in unauthorized colonies, squatters, slums. Mumbai is trying to open up this potential of which is blocked in the unauthorized development and slums in the core city areas, which is the prime land. And there we need manufacturing and high income services to operate more effectively. So we have to see that how the Mumbai model, or we can adopt other model, and how these areas can be redeveloped, which are in the core city. Large chunk of land is occupied by them, but they block a huge chunk of vertical land which is available in the city. How to open this potential of land which is existing in the city, which will accommodate housing activities, rental housing and other housing, and the housing initiatives will have to focus in the larger cities in this aspect. And among these cities we have to also see this is time of competition and economic development. So we are now talking about a $1 trillion city. By 2047, India will have $32 trillion economy, and that time we will expect around 10 cities, $10 trillion plus cities. Mumbai could be the first one, because Mumbai is, today has about $310 billion economy, followed by Delhi. So Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, these would be the first, but we need to also promote other cities to become $1 trillion city in the years to come in the context of Vikasit Bharat India 2047. So for that angle, we have to focus on larger cities. Then comes the million-plus cities and smaller cities and census towns. There are estimates that now we have around 800 census towns. When the census will held, the real number will be identified. So those are urban by nature, because their economic profile has changed. So that we have to plan in a different manner for different types of cities, which need to be incorporated in our implementation of budget amount, that how to address the 100 large cities, which is the main focus of the budget. And then the budget also says about water supply, sanitation, sewage and solid waste. Pooled finance fund and other funds should be brought in. But if we really see the budget estimate and actual, there is huge difference always, because demand is very poor. Who is going to prepare project and implement the bankable projects? The viability gap funding is there, but how to channelize that? 15th Finance Commission expected 44 urban agglomerations with 1,200 urban local bodies to prepare projects on water supply, sanitation and sewage, but nothing happened. That amount may remain unutilized. So we have to see how to move beyond the administrative city and plan for a city region. Then only the issue of water supply, sewage and sanitation, the way we are expecting, can be resolved.
Thank you, gentlemen, for sharing all your thoughts as quickly as possible. We will open the floor for a very quick round of questions. We have mics going around. I just request you to introduce yourself before you ask your question.
Hi, I'm Ansari Zadeh from newsip.in. I have a question to Chairman, sir. Sir, there is a budget announcement, 3 crore additional home to be built up for the people of living under the sky. What will be the role of HUDCO in this scheme?
Thank you. Actually, the scheme guidelines are yet to come, and what we are discussing that in the last scheme of PMAY also, HUDCO was a prominent catalytic driver in implementation of such schemes. It starts from the consultancy. We had seen the project reports of the state, which was submitted for sanction to the central government, and on the basis of the sample assessment of the detailed project reports, the government of India has sanctioned those things. And we had also participated and contributed towards the counterpart funding to the state governments. We had funded around 5 states to the tune of around 17,000 crores, which was actually gone to our housing sector infrastructure lending. So this time, since government of India will be giving around 2.2 lakh crores out of 10 lakh crores, so there is a opportunity of funding around 7.8 lakh crores. And it's a big opportunity and the responsibility that HUDCO will have to take over and cater within 2 to 3 years of the span of time. So I think these are my initial remarks, but I will wait for the guidelines to come.
Any other questions?
Hello. One of the more interesting successes of the PMAY in the first phase was there were 2 large areas where you saw substantial uptake. One was, of course, the credit-linked subsidy scheme, for which this budget does not seem to make that much provision. And the other is the beneficiary-linked contribution scheme, where essentially the money was given to the beneficiary and who then sort of built houses given the fact that they had land. Now, as Dr. Rao mentioned, one is not quite sure whether in the urban areas they will end up improving the digitization of urban records, and therefore that will be one way in which to sort of extend that particular scheme. So it's possible that so one of the things that I'll be very eagerly awaiting the guidelines also, as the CMD has just said, is to see whether the focus this time is also on house building by the individual, or whether it will be more in the other 2 verticals, which was the affordable housing in partnership and ISSR verticals, which were not that successful in the other spaces. So that was the thrust that I think would be interesting to see going forward.
If there are no other questions, we can more or less conclude. And before we conclude, may I...
I'd like to just,
please
take that point on, because I think it's a very important point that has been touched upon. The critical problem, the way I understand it, on this, on housing for the poor, has been on the price of land, and the design of the scheme may or may not succeed depending upon the price considerations. And therefore, in larger cities, at least work at some of my colleagues, Debar Pitas here, tends to show that it has really, it's less likely to succeed because the price levels tend to be higher. The smaller cities, it's much more likely. Now, if we do not change the design of the scheme, then it is fairly clear that this particular program will translate into something which is more, tends to be more towards smaller cities, which is fine, but I mean, smaller cities themselves need their own this thing. But I think generally the big gap has been, and the point that was also made, that you, in larger cities, you can only go to the periphery. And if you go to the periphery, then unless and until you're tying up public transport with that, it's not really going to work. So the scheme by itself is actually gets orphaned until and unless you start to do the, even if not a holistic planning, at least tie up public transport with the availability of land. And I think that the budget is not the right mechanism to be able to tie in these two. But I think after the budget, there are other mechanisms and that can be put in place that can help align these two. It's really critical that we do that.
One small
Yeah,
point
sure.
on this. This is, I think, most important point. They have land but do not occupy the land legally. That is the real issue. Then only they can go for beneficiary linked, self-help or incremental housing. So for that, the question of land ownership, I don't know to what extent this exercise of land records will resolve that, but that needs a legal intervention like Gujarat is doing now. Gujarat Act has come. That type of approach would be needed.
I agree with you. The problem is land records, actually some places have some land records. It's not that land records are zero in India. So while I agree with you, I think there is still an opportunity to be able to align this while we keep on improving our land records.
And also the one point related to this is in a similar manner, municipal bodies, they have land, but they do not have the ownership of that land. Ownership lies with the state through Nazir land, and that's why they can't use this as a collateral. So that is also equally important aspect which will open up provision of infrastructure development in cities, particularly small and medium towns.
Sir, one last, I could not stop my temptation of asking this question directly when I get this opportunity of sitting in front of you. Sir, city economics, important, budget has a great interest in it. HUDCO, can it and how can it play a role in that?
I think I will go directly and straight that we are the lending institution for all the infrastructure which are planned for the country, and most of the things are covered in the budget, and they will work as a catalytic actions, and HUDCO will supplement through its initiative towards the states, because final responsibility of the creation of these assets will be through the state governments and the state government entities, other than the PPP or VGF kind of model. So we will be engaging, and we had already been engaged with the state governments for PMAY regarding the assessments. That work is already started and in progress. So I think it's a big opportunity, not only for the housing, but all connected infrastructure to develop with.
Sir, it's okay. If I can suggest, sir, I believe economy is more than housing, and perhaps we'll have to maybe rethink on how we can kind of contribute to the larger idea of city economics. Maybe the time is
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Nice point. Thank you so much.
Before we conclude, may I request CMD HUDCO to please present a small token of our appreciation to our panelists. Dr. Lavish Bhandari.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Partha.
Thank you for coming, sir. Sparing the time.
Dr. K.K. Pandey. Dr. PSN Rao. And Shri Vikas Chandra. Thank you so much, sir. May I invite Mr. Nagraj, Director Corporate Planning, HUDCO, to please give the vote of thanks.
Esteemed guests, distinguished panelists, and dear colleagues, very good evening to all of you. I am sure all of us agree that this year's union budget is a very progressive and forward-looking one, having the blueprint of Honorable Prime Minister's vision of Viksit Bharat. The budget has recognized the key role to be played by especially in the housing and infrastructure sector to realize the goal of Viksit Bharat. And therefore, many important provisions towards housing and urban development highlighted in the budget, such as Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana, rental housing for industrial workers, capital expenditure There is almost 11.11 lakh crore, which is almost 3.4% of the GDP, have been evaluated by our expert panelists. As we come to the end of this program, it is my privilege and pleasure to extend a vote of thanks to all who has contributed to this program. On behalf of the entire HUDCO family members, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to each one of you for gracing this occasion at this insightful panel discussion on the budget 24-25. This event has been a resounding success due to active participation and invaluable contribution by all of you. Firstly, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Sri Sanjay Kulshestraji, Chairman and Managing Director HUDCO, for his leadership for chairing this occasion. And sir, your invaluable insights and guidance has been instrumental in steering this discussion. I am deeply grateful to our distinguished panelist, Sri Partho Mukhopadhyay from Center for Policy Research, for profound analysis and thought-provoking provision on infrastructure and capital expenditure. So, Dr. Lavish Bhandari, President of the Trade Center for Socio-Economic Progress, for sharing your valuable expert view on environment, climate change, green building, and socio-economic progress. Thank you so much, sir. My sincere thanks and gratitude to Dr. P.S.N. Rao from the School of Planning and Architecture for its valuable insights on working women's hostel, rental housing scheme. So I also would like to express my sincere thanks and appreciation to Sri Vikas Chandraji, Director Deloitte, for expert views on 4 pillars, especially cities as a growth centers, private sector investments, etc. My sincere thanks and appreciation to Dr. K.K. Pandey, economist, is our ex-colleague at HUDCO. He has a deep understanding on municipal finance and is an expert and is working in IIPA. So your collective expertise has enriched our understanding and sparked meaningful discussion on the critical aspects of the budget 24-25. I would like to express my sincere thanks to media persons, those who are especially here. So I would also like to express my sincere thanks to organizing teams, excellent organizing. It's the first time in HUDCO we have done such a wonderful program. Lastly, I thank all my attendees, HUDCO participants, especially both online as well as offline. Your valuable presence has added a glow to this event. As we conclude, let us carry forward the valuable insights gained today and work collaboratively towards continued growth and development of our nation as a Viksit Bharat by 2047. Thank you once again. I wish all the pleasant evening. Kindly join us for a high tea. Thank you so much.